The cars have been driven, the scores have been tallied, and all of the arguments have been won and lost. And now we have our list, the 2014 Ward's 10 Best Engines. And here they are. 3-liter supercharged V6 in the Audi S5, 3-liter diesel inline 6 in the BMW 535d, 6.2-liter V8 in the all-new Corvette, 2-liter diesel 4-cylinder in the Chevy Cruze, 83-kilowatt electric motor in the Fiat 500e, 1-liter 3-cylinder EcoBoost in the Ford Fiesta, 3.5-liter V6 in the Honda Accord, 2.7-liter flat 6 in the Porsche Cayman, 3-liter diesel V6 in the Ram 1500 pickup truck, and then finally the 1.8-liter turbocharged inline 4 in the Volkswagen Jetta. We have the Ward's editors here talking about our picks for this year, and to my right, Steve Finley, Byron Pope, Drew Winter, James Amond, Christy Schweinsberg. And so let's start talking about engines. The big trend that we saw this year was diesels. We had 6 excellent diesels in the competition. 3 of them have made the list, as you know. We're going to talk first about the Ram 1500. Really significant 3-liter V6, engineered by VM Motori, which is owned by Fiat. And as Chrysler told us, it was very simple, very inexpensive for them to slot that engine right into a full-size pickup truck. And we've been clamoring for this for years. The U.S. truck market has been really well-suited for a light-duty diesel. So now we finally have one. So Drew, what was your impression of driving this engine?
It was really all I hoped it would be. It was smooth, powerful, really very comparable to some of the diesels and the luxury cars we've been testing this year. And excellent fuel economy, especially combined with the 8-speed transmission. And I was really interested in this application because we've been hearing for years about the pros and cons of light-duty diesels and pickups. And of course, we know that GM and Ford had light-duty diesels on the shelf, and we're looking at putting them into pickups back in around 2007, 2008. They put them on the shelf, and a lot of other folks did as well as the recession loomed, and everyone was unsure where the diesel market was going to go. Certainly, Chrysler went through with its plans. Of course, it made sense for it. It had a diesel in Europe, and I think this application really turned out well, and I think it's going to make everybody rethink diesels. It's, I think everybody really liked it.
Yeah, I thought the NVH on that was particularly good. Inside and outside, for a diesel, it was quite good, and you take into consideration that folks are going to be spending all day in these trucks. It's basically their mobile office. Outstanding NVH. And
you put an 8-speed automatic with it, and wow, I mean, it's so smooth. And also the fuel economy that we were getting was really outstanding, I thought. We did better than 22, 23 miles per gallon in a full-size pickup truck. And of course, you can do better. You know, if you're out on a long haul somewhere in a vehicle like that, in a diesel, you know, easily I think you could do your 30 miles per gallon, which would be just phenomenal in a full-size pickup truck.
And like Drew was talking about the diesels and people holding back, I think if this sells well, you're gonna see other automakers following suit and putting small diesels in their full-size pickups. Yep. Which a lot of enthusiasts have been clamoring for years. But like Drew said, all these circumstances came together and kept it from happening. Ram, I should say, did it, and I think if it does do well, next year we'll be talking about maybe even F-150 with a diesel.
Yeah. Well, in terms of hitting the market, do you think that the fact that it is a Fiat diesel and a all-American truck would scare some buyers away?
I don't think buyers know. I don't think they know or care.
It is an irony, though, that it is a Fiat.
Yeah.
It was dropped into this American.
Well, Fiat owns VM Motori. I wouldn't call it a Fiat engine.
But it's an Italian engine.
It is an Italian engine. We have German engines. We have engines from all over the world.
But Italian engine and American pickup.
That's my point.
Built in Mexico, right?
Well, again, we're talking about it. You know, this isn't a cheap truck we're talking about. It's going to be even the initial version's pretty pricey. Mm-hmm. Buyers are very astute these days, and I don't think there's going to be any concerns or whatever about that. I mean, I think the interesting thing, we had a lot of discussion during our evaluation, and when we talked to Bob Lee, the top engine guy at Chrysler, about the actual economics. Certainly people are concerned about where diesel prices are going to go. Sometimes they're the same as premium or less gasoline. Other times we've seen them as much as $1 a gallon more than regular. But clearly the case you make for a diesel is towing especially. You get really good increases with fuel economy when you tow heavy loads with a diesel, when you tow with this one. Just the opposite occurs when you've got something like the Ford EcoBoost, where it's when their engine has tons of torque, but also if you're towing for a long time and really getting in that turbo boost, your fuel economy goes way down.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the cost, you know, this engine is not going to be that expensive. It's not like the top line powertrain. You can get in this truck for, I think, around $30,000. And as you know, people are spending top dollar on pickup trucks these days. You know, they don't mind spending $50,000, $60,000 for a pickup truck. So I could see this becoming a very high volume part of, you know, of the Ram pickup truck. So let's talk about the Cruise diesel now. 2-liter, 4-cylinder. We had a lot of 4-cylinder diesels. We had BMW 328D. We had the Mercedes-Benz E250 and the GLK 250. Which is a 2.1 liter. So we had these 3 4-cylinder diesels that were good, and I drove all 3 of them back to back, and come to find out the Cruise was doing about 36 miles per gallon, the BMW 328D was doing somewhere around 36 miles per gallon, but the Mercedes was about 4 or 5 miles per gallon behind based on our test drives. So definitely the Cruise had the advantage in terms of the fuel economy, and then even compared to the BMW 328D, the Cruise, in terms of NVH, I thought was pretty solid. I was really impressed that, you know, Chevy could go to bat against these, you know, these German luxury brands and do well with diesel.
And keep the cost relatively low while doing it, while BMW and Mercedes buyers don't mind, and you could put more money into that NVH.
Right.
I think the value proposition is pretty strong with the Cruise diesel, and of course, again, in our discussions with the engineers and whatnot, their target was the Jetta diesel, and which was setting the bar pretty high. But I really do think the Cruise diesel is going to find a market. It's going to be a little tougher if fuel prices continue to remain low for both gasoline and diesel. People aren't. It might be a little tougher sell, but man, it's just on the highway. The thing is so quiet, so efficient. It's really pleasant to drive, and I think GM really has a shot there. This is a toe in the water for them. But I think they should do reasonably well because it's a well-executed application, and they've had the engine around in Europe for a long time. So this is not just a brand new thing for them.
Yeah, it really is a road warrior. And you and I drove it at long distances up and down the state, and I was getting 46 miles to the gallon, and I was wondering if the fuel gauge was broken at one point because it just wouldn't go down. And also the price point, it's $28,000 for this particular vehicle.
Sticker. Mm-hmm. But you can get the diesel for, I think, as low as $25,000.
Okay. And the other thing is that a GM engineer got 70 miles per gallon hyper mileage. So I asked him or them. They were telling us about that, what he did, and it's just amazing driving. But it really is a fine vehicle from a company that had a checkered history of diesel engines, but they really hit it with this one.
Yeah.
Well, let's face it, too. Our experience with diesels all around is that they usually hit their stated numbers on the sticker,
and they exceed them,
or exceed them. And our experience with hybrids is pretty spotty, to say the least.
It's the reverse.
It's pretty much we're pretty lucky to hit their EPA numbers with a hybrid, but diesels almost always exceed them. So
sure.
Yeah, an excellent diesel. We got great fuel economy with it. And the NVH, I think, stands toe-to-toe with anything you're going to get from Germany. But the other interesting part about this diesel is GM wants to sell it on its sportiness. And I think it really delivers with all that torque that you get from it. And in fact, the engineers had to do some tweaks to the suspension and to the steering so that when you were cornering and at tip-in also, that you weren't lighting up the tires. So they had to dial it back a little bit because it does have such a sporty aspect to it.
Do you get a sense for sales in terms of the how the Cruise diesel is selling at this point in the marketplace, and do you get a sense for outlook, say for 2014? How do you think it's going to do?
Well, GM tells me they're awfully pleased with the way it's going, but I would assume if they saw anywhere near 10% take rate on that, they'd be popping champagne corks.
Well, and they didn't even have a sense for sales when they went onto the market. They said, we don't know. And you have to admire that. That's kind of refreshing in terms of, okay, we're going to find out, but we believe in this engine.
It's uncharted waters. Plus, I mean, they don't have the reputation for diesels like VW's established over the years. So.
Yep.
But they've got to start someplace, and it's a good fuel economy play. And if it does work out, that engine, they can easily put it in a lot of other GM vehicles.
Exactly. And the engineers mentioned that.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next diesel. This was the BMW 535D, 3-liter inline 6. This engine was on the list, I think, in 2009 and 2010. This is a new version of that engine. And boy, I mean, really smooth, just really impressive. The other engine that was going head-to-head was the 3-liter V6 in the TDI Audi A6. Once again, a great package, and NVH was pretty close between the two, but when it came down to fuel economy, in our testing, we were getting better than 35 miles per gallon among several editors in the 535D, but in the A6 it was, I think, 3 or 4 miles per gallon behind that. So at the end of the day, we had to go with the fuel economy. But think about that 6-cylinder diesel, 413 pound-feet of torque, and just a hair behind the 4-cylinder Cruise diesel in terms of fuel economy. So, to have that much power and still get tremendous fuel economy. And we didn't do it.
A car that's not small. The 5 Series is not a small car.
You're right, and the fuel economy is better than when we drove the earlier version of this engine in the 3 Series when it made the list back in 2010. So it's really quite remarkable. Anybody else want to comment on the 535D?
No, well, the whole car. I mean, anybody that thinks that a diesel is inconsistent with luxury hasn't driven that car, I'll tell you. It's really, really plush and quiet.
Amazingly quiet.
Yeah.
And very quick, very fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the Fiat 500e electric vehicle, 83 kilowatts. We drove also the Chevy Spark EV, and as far as I was concerned, the two were basically neck and neck. But boy, the 500e was just so much fun to drive, and the range, I think the range between the two of those vehicles was, 85 miles. And for some reason, I feel like the electric vehicles this year, like they've gotten better. The automakers have gotten better at giving us a range calculator that is a bit more forgiving. I mean, there's less panic baked in, it seems like. So, years ago, like when the Leaf was brand new, you'd see that number just, you'd see your range just plunge as you're driving the car. And for some reason, there were a number of times when I drove the 500e, and I would actually get to my destination and actually had more range than when I left. So
I experienced that too.
The regenability was really great, and I think EVs are getting better at regenning, putting more of that power back into the battery pack. I drove
from the
it.
brakes.
Yes, from the brakes. I drove it over a weekend, and I was routinely getting better range. I was traveling, a certain number of miles, like 10 miles, but I was only losing like 6 or 7 miles of range. So it was really performing well for me. Granted, we had some really nice
the
temperatures.
weather. Yeah.
It was between 60 and 70 degrees when we drove the car, I think. So it did probably benefit from the
Well, and it
warmer
had the
weathers.
instant torque going, which was really exciting. And, I don't want to give the wrong impression because I think this engine belongs on the list, but you almost wonder if it
propulsion systems.
Motor.
Propulsion.
I'm sorry.
It's not an engine.
Let me back that up. But you could argue that it should be the Fiat/Bosch engine, and also Fiat was not real excited about bringing this vehicle to market. They were talking about how much money they're going to lose per unit. So it's those two things kind of are interesting, let's put it that way.
It's racking up awards, though. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a
it has.
surprise hit for them, and I hope, our award, I don't know if it'll be our award alone, but I hope our award will prompt them to offer it in more states than just California,
Yeah.
because right now it's just relegated to California. And
Well, do you think there's a certain irony in saying, well, I guess we'll bring it to market because we want to be politically correct and then winning all these awards?
It wasn't so much about being politically correct, it was they had to do it.
You have to
Our-
do it. You
Yeah.
have to sell electric cars in California, and you know we've all heard Fiat CEO, Sergio Marchionne, complain bitterly that they're losing like $10,000 for every vehicle sale. But I mean, what really put it over the top for me, and I think most of it, it's just the first electric car that is really fun to drive. I mean,
Got that Fiat mojo going.
yeah, and it's just got a lot of the torque, but you can throw the car around. And well, of course, I also have the distinction of getting a ticket.
Yes. How
Yes.
much was that ticket? by the way?
So
How much was the ticket?
it was. Well, actually, the cop, he saw I was an electric car, and he patted me on the back, thanked me for saving the planet, and that isn't true.
He paid
No,
you?
it was just-
He paid you?
No, it's-
Yeah, he's like,
that's
here you
all a
go.
big lie.
Great
No.
story.
It wasn't cheap. I think it was about $120.
You must have been going quite fast.
Yeah, but I was having more fun than I realized.
It's easy to do in that car. I mean, you just give it a
Yeah,
little.
that
It is
gas and
quick.
it
I
just-
tried to explain all that to the cop.
Yeah.
But it really, really is a fun car.
Yeah, it really feels buttoned up is the way to put
Yeah.
it. And that gives you the confidence to drive it like a real car. so to
Right.
speak.
Some electric cars, especially the early ones, felt like oversized golf carts. And at highway speeds, they were kind of frightening.
They were all oversized golf
And you were
carts.
afraid to get into the accelerator because you didn't want to see your range.
Your
fall.
range
Yeah.
disappeared. It was like having a hole in your gas tank,
But like Chrissy said, we drove it in pretty moderate weather. And the thing that's still holding EVs back is we've seen in this kind of weather in winter, when you use the HVAC, your range goes down significantly. That has to be overcome before I think they become widespread, especially in states like Michigan.
Yeah. So last point on this was to Steve's point about torque. Yeah, of course, it's instant in an electric vehicle. The Spark EV is actually rated at 400 pound-feet of torque, and the 500e is 147 pound-feet of torque. And I drove those two cars. We had them at the same time, if you recall. And I drove them back to back, and I couldn't really sense that one was 3 times more powerful than the other in terms of torque. So
You would think it was the other way around. I mean,
Yeah.
it felt like 400 pound-feet in the 500e.
And I think that had a lot to do with more with the gearing, with the way the cars were geared than it did with the actual output of the motors somehow. But,
all right, so let's move on to the Audi S5. 5-time winner of the 10 Best Engines trophy, and boy, we really battled this one out because there were certain elements who felt that it didn't really belong on the list because it hadn't really been updated. And I am in total agreement that an engine has to earn its stripe. It's not just going to be given a pass to get back on the list. So I was ready to see this engine get replaced, and we couldn't find another V6 engine or inline 6-cylinder engine that floated our boat the way this one did. And so we had to put this engine back on the list, and it was a battle. But so Drew was the key instigator in trying to harpoon this engine. You want to?
well, I mean, obviously we don't want, engines don't stay on the list by seniority, and I just feel that with the level of new engines that are coming in the marketplace now, we started this list 20 years ago. There was not the number of engines being introduced every year, and the product cycles were much longer. Now we're seeing so many incredibly new technologies. We're going to see fuel cells next year. We've got electric vehicles and all these different types. I just feel we have to take a very hard look on every engine when it's on the list more than 2 or 3 years, because there are so much other important new technologies, great new engines that come along. I don't want us giving short shrift to any of those just because we've kind of fallen in love with this one really incredibly good engine.
Well, that's the thing. Even with the new technologies, they're not better. And why should Audi change something that doesn't need to be changed?
And it's still making 111 horsepower per liter.
Yeah, which
So,
is
I mean,
very good.
It's astounding, and also the versatility of this engine. It's fast become the bread and butter engine for Audi. I mean, from the S5 to the A6, A7, A8, Q5, Q7, SQ5 when it comes out. So, I mean, it's like that's the go-to engine for Audi.
Well, and it clearly does also fulfill, I mean, a lot of our other sort of requirements for the 10 best engines, where usually we don't like to see an engine that's just purpose-built or just has very narrow applications. And this is an engine that is really used on a huge number of platforms. It's used with hybrid, combined with hybrid technologies and everything. So in that sense, they've managed to scale this wonderful engine to such a high level. That's why they can provide, I think, all the great engineering and the great features they can at a relatively low cost, because it's going to be spread across so many different platforms.
Well, I must say, behind the scenes, I really enjoyed the passionate argument between basically you, and you were both right, essentially. You know, it is a great engine, and philosophically, that should keep it on the list. But there is the technology issue, is like how much have they come along. So it was entertaining and enlightening to hear the two sides, and again, both sides were right.
Can you improve on perfection?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, you know, Henry Ford thought the Model T was the ideal car. If he were around today, yeah, he didn't even like coming out with the new one. He was mad at his son for doing that like 15, 20 years later. So there is no ideal car. But this car is really nice. This engine is really nice.
And if it's S5, it's
that's exactly.
It could be it's like a fast and not so furious. You know, it's fast and slightly agitated. It's you know, it can be docile, a good daily driver. But when you step in, you know, into that accelerator, that thing just flies.
Well, and it does have a little bit different strategy than what we're seeing. Most downsized engines are turbocharged, and this one has been supercharged from the get-go. So they're using a little different strategy, but clearly it has worked for them in providing, you know, an engine with tons of really creamy torque delivered at low RPMs, which delivers a terrific driving experience. So it still is very advanced, even though it's you know, getting up in years in terms of product development cycles.
Well, it's nice to hear you say that.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about high output engines, let's move on to the Corvette. The small block engine, 5th generation. They've made 100 million of these engines. I mean, it's truly astounding. And if you think about, since 1955, they've only done significant re-engineering of this engine 5 times. It's truly amazing. And you know, is there still a future for pushrod engines? You know, we were all doubtful, but damn, you drive this car, and you know, you also drive this engine, or a version of this engine in the GMC Sierra Denali pickup, and it's just truly transcendental, I thought. 460 horsepower, 465 pound-feet of torque with the version that we drove, which has the special exhaust package. And, boy, so much fun to drive.
Yeah, it really does continue that legacy of big power from a compact package. There's one other aspect of this engine, actually the entire small block family, that doesn't necessarily get talked about, and that's the manufacturing of it. I had an opportunity to go to Tonawanda, New York, where they build all of the small block engines, and GM has actually brought in a lot of new automated equipment for this, but they've actually decreased the level of automation at the plant and increased the amount of hands-on work that goes into these engines. So GM considers it a hand-built engine, and they think that that pays off in quality down the road, in durability. And you see the people at the plant, and they're very passionate about building these engines. So hopefully that does pay off in durability.
Do they have that level on the 6.2 that goes into the trucks then too, or is there more automation on that engine?
No, it's the same across the line.
Same across.
They're building these. They're building all these engines on the same line.
Wow. What I noticed that as the displacement rose, the impressions of the small block got better. We of course also drove the 4.3 liter V6, which is a first ever, you know, a new addition to the small block family. That was very good in the pickup truck. It's the base engine, I believe, now in the Silverado and the GMC Sierra. The fuel economy was not great, though. and then step up to the 5.3 liter, and that's really your volume. That's what 70-some% of all the pickup trucks, for GM, and then also into the SUVs. The 5.3 liter was very compelling to me as well. I enjoyed it, but the higher you go in displacement, the more active that four-cylinder mode is, and you can watch the light change from V8 to four-cylinder mode, and boy, you're in four-cylinder mode a lot in that, in the 6.2 liter in the truck version. In the Corvette, you don't really pay attention. In fact, I'm not even sure.
There's no indication that you're in four-cylinder mode.
But you are going into four-cylinder mode in the Corvette as well.
Well, I'm not sure how many people buy Corvettes for fuel economy, but it does get 1729.
A lot of them do.
They brag about it. They don't necessarily buy them for that reason. But if you talk, if you talk to the product development team, they'll say a lot of Corvette.
I got
Corvette
30
owners
might
brag
gallon driving on the highway.
That fuel,
Corvette owners brag about everything.
Yeah, of course that's
that
true.
active fuel management system that really is great. And I think you were pointing out that you put in seventh gear, it's at about 1,300 RPM.
Oh, great sleeper gear, yeah. Just puts it right to sleep, and yeah, they do talk a lot about their fuel economy, and they did a lot. They put in a lot of new technology on this to the small block, the direct injection, and they've combined direct injection with cylinder deactivation. They've opened the window on the cylinder deactivation, so you're using it more often. They've improved the combustion cycle. So just lots of great new technology to this engine.
I was really surprised in the pickup in the Sierra Denali. It didn't seem overwhelming or uncivilized as V8s often do in pickup trucks. It was a very, I don't want to say sedate driving experience, but I guess it was more of a civilized driving experience than I was expecting.
That's really their luxury engine for their above $40,000 pickups, and it's. I was also very impressed with it, and of course they also have noise cancellation in that to make the transitions from 4 to 8 easier. And I think also because of the big displacement cylinders, that makes that mode, shifting going into really four-cylinder mode a lot easier for it. But I was just really impressed with that engine. Well, in every displacement, really good engine.
So let's keep talking about high output engines. Porsche Cayman, 2.7 liter, flat six, just a beautiful exhaust note and lots of power at all ranges. Naturally aspirated. They baked in gasoline direct injection in this generation, and of course this engine is also in the Boxster, base engine in the Boxster, base engine in the Cayman. And boy, there were times when I was driving that car thinking, do I really need a 911 with this?
No, you don't.
It's so much fun, and the fuel economy was pretty darn good.
And nothing sounds like a Porsche. You're right about the exhaust note. They're just unique, and I don't know how they get it, or it's an incredible machine. And
it helps to put the engine right over your ear.
Yeah, that might have something to do with it too. But it handles well. It does everything you ask it to, and it's normally aspirated, and it gets decent fuel economy. I mean, I know it's hard. Some people say, well, it's a Porsche, you're paying a lot of money, but it's in line with some of the other winners on the list as far as price.
Base price of $52,000. We jacked up the price cap this year to $60,000. That's base price. So even if we hadn't raised the cap from $55,000 last year to $60,000, the Cayman was going to be eligible for the competition. So, and then also, the Cayman, it kind of reminds me of the S5 in that. They did a great job with keeping, the power to weight ratio. They're very, very, very cognizant of getting the most power to the wheels and just really making this drive experience first rate. And this car only weighs 2,800 pounds, and so it doesn't take a whole lot to move that much weight, and it's just wonderful the way the Cayman just gets the job done.
Yeah, they struck a good balance with that car, definitely.
Absolutely.
That made the list easily. There was little discussion about whether.
Yeah, you're right. It's one of the few that anybody argued on.
We didn't argue at all
No,
about that one.
it was just on there and it stayed on there.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on now to the Honda Accord V6. This engine has been on the list several times. Single overhead cam, which is a bit unusual for a lot of V6s these days, but boy, it still gets the job done. And we were getting 28 miles per gallon routinely in this engine, and there's a lot of four-cylinder engines that we drove that didn't even come close to that. And the Accord is just, great engine. Of course, we also tested the Acura RLX, which is a similar engine, but that one has direct injection, and the Accord V6 still makes do with port injection. So it kind of makes you wonder. We didn't find that the fuel economy was much better in the RLX, so we think it's perfectly adequate to go with port injection instead of baking in the DI.
As you and I talked about the other day, I think the introduction of direct injection for the RLX was probably more of a technology play than anything, maybe a price of entry to be in that luxury segment.
And isn't it interesting to see 278 horsepower, which, it feels like more than that, but think about, for the past 10 years, basically, we've had a number of six-cylinder engines on our list that have made better than 300 horsepower. So this is a trend that I noticed this year. In a lot of cases, engines have actually gone down in horsepower and torque, and you don't feel like you're missing it. So clearly, there's engineering going into fuel economy. They're tuning for fuel economy, which is great. And it's got to be difficult to strike that balance as an automaker between we want the most power, but we also want the best fuel economy.
Or we've seen them go down in horsepower and increase torque.
Right.
But I think what we're learning and what the automakers are doing is really looking at power and torque delivery rather than peak numbers. They're looking for a driving experience and more of an overall customer feel, and that all goes back to then delivering more torque at lower RPM. So to deliver that just general strong driving experience, strong tip-in, rather than a peak horsepower number where you've got to hit the high RPMs.
Yeah, it has the precision of a Swiss clock, and this is the reason so many Honda Accord owners love their Hondas.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this is also why it's very hard for dealerships to sell extended service contracts on a Honda Accord with a V6 in it.
Well, we have to give some credit to the transmissions too. Honda's done a tremendous job on its transmissions in recent years, especially.
I think we drove it with a 6-speed automatic this year. Mm-hmm. So let's move on to the Ford Fiesta. This is the first 3-cylinder engine to make the Ward's 10 Best Engines list. Turbocharged, direct injection, EcoBoost. The EcoBoost family is growing rapidly. So. Byron, tell us about driving the 3-cylinder.
I liked it. There was a little bit of discussion about it. Maybe the fuel economy wasn't as great as some of us thought it should be. I was routinely getting close to 40, which I thought was good. NVH was a little rough. It's inherent to 3-cylinder engines, but they did a good job of making it way smoother than the previous 3-cylinders back in the 80s. This engine's very important for Ford. They took a big risk. They knew that maybe not all Americans would embrace a 3-cylinder engine or something that small. They had some fun with it. They had a little PR stunt where they brought it on an airplane and brought it through security in a handbag.
In the overhead bin.
Yeah, and they put an overhead bin. I mean, that's how small it is.
Yeah, or the car.
The engine block.
52-pound engine block.
Yeah. And this is an important engine for Ford. Not only is it going in the Fiesta here, there's talk of it being in the Focus here, but in Europe it's going into the Mondeo, which is a much larger car. So, I think this could open up the floodgates for small displacement engines like the 1-liter, and I think we're going to see more of these in the future. And we actually had another 3-cylinder on our list, we tested this year.
The Mitsubishi
Right.
Mirage.
So, I think it's just, as fuel, right now it's kind of, moderate, the prices, but if they start going up and people say, hey, 3-cylinders are not that bad, I think the 3 is going to become the new 4.
Yeah, well, we already know they're in the pipeline. I mean, we've got BMW has some, and we're going to see 3-cylinders in Minis.
The Mini will have a 1.5 3-cylinder next year.
So
coming soon.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely a trend in Europe, and it's going to be a pretty strong trend in the U.S. probably as well. And I was actually testing cars in the 80s when they had the 3-cylinders and Subarus. And
they were really great, weren't they?
Oh, man.
Didn't Geo Metro have one? Or?
Yeah. And they were really, well, they were always in the cheapest cars that you could buy. They were always pretty horrible. And the difference between what we're seeing now with the Ford EcoBoost and particularly what I remember now is just night and day. I mean, the engine was really fun. I just really enjoyed it. It had, especially for an entry-level engine, it's got a really nice exhaust note. And it's, you know, as a motorcycle enthusiast, 3 cylinders have a long and very good history in motorcycles for being very narrow and powerful and having just a great exhaust note. So I mean, it's just wow, I really like that engine. It had to be on the list.
And you pointed out that they did it without balance shafts as far as with NVH, which you were kind of...
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's key to the way the cylinders fire. It can be a very rough engine. Adding balance shafts can solve that problem, but then it's an expensive solution, and it also robs some of your efficiency. So for Ford to be able to do that without balance shafts, to find sort of a new, elegant engineering solution, again, that's a kudos to Ford engineers for doing that.
And achieving 123 horsepower per liter.
Yeah,
That's
10 years ago, that was unheard of.
That's really
Well, it was easy to do the specific output of horsepower per liter on it. You didn't have to do any math. But
even I can do that.
Yeah, right.
it doesn't Ford tout it as the best output per liter?
Specific output?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, among 3-cylinder engines, probably, but I mean, there have been a number of 4-cylinder engines that have made our list. 137 horsepower, 136 horsepower. Some of those 4-cylinder turbos get up there pretty high. I think it was the Regal GS that was making, was it 136 or 137?
I think this has got to be
A couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think this has probably got the highest specific output, maybe for a Ford engine or for a Ford engine in the U.S., and maybe it ties with the 1.6.
No, because the well, what was the Focus? Is the Focus ST? The 2-liter turbo is what, 252?
Yeah, I think it is 252. You're right.
Wow. Anyway, it's close.
So one of it's a lot of horsepower for a big specific output.
So our last engine now, the Volkswagen Jetta, 1.8-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. As far as I'm concerned, boy, we had a lot of 4-cylinder turbos in the competition, and you know, as we were just talking about, BMW, General Motors, Hyundai, Mercedes now has one, and who am I forgetting? Well, of course, Ford. 4-cylinder turbos is becoming like the meat of the market, it seems like, for engines. And now Volkswagen has both a 1.8-liter and a 2-liter, part of the new engine family, EA 888. And this is the 3rd generation of this particular engine. And we had several 4-cylinder 2-liter turbos that came in for the competition, but for some reason the 1.8 just stepped 1 inch, several inches above the 2-liter turbos that we drove. I just got the feel that the NVH was spectacular. The step-off is great. I mean, at all engine ranges, the engine's really smooth and creamy, and you think, wow, this base price is $23,000, and it's you know, it feels every bit as good as that BMW 328 that I was driving with the 4-cylinder turbo. So. Any other impressions on the Jetta?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I certainly noticed in spending some time in it is terrific fuel economy. And also, again, it feels very modern in the sense that you have lots of low-end torque, low RPMs, and very strong. Just a great engine for an economy car. Works well with the transmission. Pleasant all around, and when you need the power, man, you hit the accelerator, it delivers. And also very quiet and strong around town.
Yeah, well, VW really likes this engine too. It's in the Jetta, of course. It is going to replace a 2.5-liter aspirated engine, naturally aspirated engine in the Beetle, the base engine. It gets the same amount of horsepower, a little more torque, and much better fuel economy than the base engine that's in there now.
And it's going into the Passat, you know. Think of the Passat. It's a big sedan, and I'm sure this engine's going to do just fine in it.
I think this is also a good example of another global trend where you see this scalability of engines and platforms, and they're saying, okay, this engine is going to go on, it's going to be very high volume, it's going to go on a lot of different platforms, so we're going to make a really good one. It's not going to be, this is going to be the base engine in XX, so we got to keep it cheap and whatever. It's no. They're going to put a lot of good engineering effort in making it a great engine, and then they're going to amortize the cost over a lot of vehicles.
I like that philosophy.
Yeah.
So we're into the lightning round at this point in our discussion. So I'm just going to cover some of the basics here. Among the winners, we had 3 diesels, we had 6 gasoline engines, we had 1 electric vehicle, 5 turbocharged engines, 1 supercharged, and 8 with direct injection. And then among all the engines that we evaluated, there were 44 engines in total. 36 of those were gasoline, 6 of those were diesel, 2 of those were electric vehicles, and 4 of them were hybrids. And I got the sense that hybrids this year were very disappointing. 3 of them placed near the bottom, and the one that did best was the Infiniti Q50 hybrid, which carries over a lot of the technology that we recognized 2 years ago in the Infiniti M35H, made the list. The base engine is still the 3.5 liter VQ, which of course was on our list for 14 straight years. But the engine has not really been updated much. The hybrid system works great in the Q50, but it didn't quite make the cut, partly because the fuel economy wasn't so great.
Fuel economy wasn't so great. This is more of a performance hybrid, sort of like the first generation Honda Accord hybrid, where you don't get the great fuel economy, but you do get the great horsepower.
Yeah.
I liked it, but I think there's still some work they could do to improve it. So I'm looking forward to seeing the next iteration of this system.
And then the Nissan Pathfinder hybrid had a 2.5 liter supercharged engine. In what I thought was a pretty good package. Think of a vehicle the size of a 7-passenger all-new Pathfinder getting most of its power from a 2.5 liter engine. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. But once again, the fuel economy was not great. So I was going to give them more points on technology because I consider it more advanced than the Q50, but still at the end of the day, the fuel economy was not great.
Yeah, I really wanted to give at least the Nissan engineers an A for effort because they really looked at some new strategies with having a supercharged engine combined as part of a hybrid powertrain, and it was kind of fun really getting on an entrance ramp and hammer it and still hearing a supercharger whine on a hybrid. I mean, that was an interesting experience, and I really think they've got a good idea. Because obviously they had to have a little bit of a different strategy for a pretty big SUV or CUV that's going to be, that they said, they know some people are going to do towing with it and other things which you don't normally think a hybrid's going to be called upon to do. So they really did their homework. I think maybe this system just needs to be tweaked a little, but man, it's a lot of engineering went into that. It was a very cool vehicle to drive.
And so now's your chance to cry in your beer about engines that didn't make the cut. CTS V-Sport, wow, lots of power, twin turbo, 3.6 liter DI V6. It was close, it was very close, but it didn't make the cut.
Yeah, it really makes the CTS a bit of a thrill ride. Lots of V8 power in a V6 package. So it was disappointing not to see that on the list, but when you add in things like such as the price point, as tested, we were well above our price point. Although you could get that very package.
The base price was like $5 or $10 below the $60,000 cap.
Exactly, and then, but you also, as you folks pointed out, it's a bit of a custom-built engine.
Yeah,
it has a very narrow focus, and that's what it probably hurt.
It's not going to go in pickup trucks.
Yeah, not at this point.
But everybody really liked the engine.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
Really fun. It was Jim did a great job on that.
Yep. Ford Fiesta ST 1.6 liter EcoBoost 4-cylinder. That's the one that I really fell in love with, and I think that's a great package. I'm kind of preferring that to the 2-liter turbo EcoBoost based on fuel economy.
Well, you mean in the Fiesta, the smaller car?
Yeah.
The one thing that we heard a lot of people complain about was the sound composer, which I like, which funnels engine noise into the cabin. I don't know if you guys drove it.
I thought it was a bit sophomore.
Yeah, I thought
that really dinged it on my score sheet.
But it's a performance car, so I think you get a pass. And
I could go with a little bit different note.
Yeah, to me, I just rather I like it to be real.
Well, it's real. It's not like there's a speaker back there.
It sounded a little
through the sound system.
Yeah.
So something else worth noting. This is the first year when we've had so much turnover on the list. We have 8 completely new engines on the 10 best engines list, and often we'd have 4 or 5 carryover engines, right? Well, we really recognized a lot of new technology this year. One engine that didn't carry over was the 5.8-liter supercharged V8 in the Ford Shelby GT500, 662 horsepower. I mean, it's hard to quibble about the specs on that one. Harder to drive, though. I mean, it's harder to keep that vehicle in a straight line. So, there comes a point where, maybe
That's a racetrack car.
Well, that's the thing. And Dave and I were having this discussion yesterday because of the death of Paul Walker, who was driving a car which is the same amount of horsepower, ironically. And how much is it too much? When you're basically giving this kind of power, which is a real race car kind of car, to the public who has, maybe they have more money than others. That doesn't make them better drivers or more responsible. Yep. And, maybe they're pushing that limit a bit far.
I spun out coming out of the parking deck, and I wasn't even going that fast.
But the thing is, I mean, one of the reasons it made the list last year was this is an absolute beast of a car, and it has no gas guzzler tax because they had really engineered it well, and it actually got pretty decent fuel economy. But to create just a beast like that and have it still not have a gas guzzler tax like so many others,
it's
that won
impressive.
a lot of points.
Great engine, and I'm glad it made the list last year.
Me too.
I think it needs a new Mustang. Is what this is. It needs a new package, a little bit more refined, and you can enjoy it a little bit more.
Give it a little time.
Yes.
Give it a little time. It's got to be coming. Drew, you were interested in another engine that didn't make the list, the 2-liter Hyundai new engine. That's Greek NU engine that has direct injection. We drove it in the Elantra, the Kia Forte, and the Kia Soul. Did pretty well. It was, it's a good 4-cylinder engine, naturally aspirated. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I thought it was a very good engine, and I'm always kind of fighting for the little guy, I guess, because it really is, making a great engine for a car that's $50,000-$60,000, and you've got a big budget and a bigger team or whatever. That's really easier to make than a really good engine that's going into entry-level cars or cars that are not much. That are less expensive, mainstream bread and butter cars. That engine, I thought, does a very good job. It's efficient. It's very powerful. Really, if you compare its output numbers, it beats just about everything else in its class in terms of horsepower and torque. So I thought it was a very good engine. I was hoping it would make the list because it deserves to be on there for well-engineered, does everything right, and it just didn't quite make the cut.
I think they still have some refinement work to do. The previous 2-liter in the Soul, for instance, didn't have DI. They've introduced DI, but you hear the noise, Totally different experience, though, driving this engine in the Soul, in the Forte, than the Elantra. It was like, in the Elantra especially, it was like a totally different experience. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what they can do with this. And a little bit more refinement, I think, should be good.
And I know you were disappointed the Mitsubishi Mirage didn't make the list.
Well, let me say something about the Mitsubishi Mirage. 3-cylinder, naturally aspirated. All right, so it's not going to win Engine of the Year, but there's a point to make about this engine car. Base price of $16,000, and okay, so the powertrain is not first rate, but the infotainment system is amazing. You
just turn it up to cover up the engine.
Well, okay. So the nav screen even shows you pictures. It's like Google Earth, as your nav screen, and great audio system.
Connected.
And man, the graphics on the screen are really something.
It's got a backup camera.
Yeah.
It's got a rear window windshield wiper.
Yeah.
It's like, why did they stop at the engine? The engine sounds like a Caproni biplane.
It did sound like a biplane. It did. I heard. I know exactly what you're saying. But my point after driving the car, I was thinking, wow, okay, so now I understand why people say that kids don't want cars. This is like the car for the young kids who don't want cars. It's like, if they're not really caring much about the engine or how well it gets from point A to point B, what they really want is that nav, is that display, that interaction. And I'm thinking they could have a sleeper hit on their hands here, because it's giving young buyers without a lot of money what they really want. Mm-hmm. And so what if the engine isn't going to make our list?
It's good on gas. They don't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
Well, tell them to come back for the interiors.
Okay, so we're in the lightning round here. Last thing, I got to call out Mercedes-Benz and Toyota. Now, Mercedes has not been on our list for 6 years. Now, it's not from a lack of trying, because this year they gave us a pretty good 2-liter turbo in the CLA. They also gave us a 355 horsepower 2-liter turbo in the CLA 45 AMG. I mean, it didn't feel like that much power to me. But anyway, Mercedes, keep trying. You know, we love your cars, we love your engines, but you know, we got to see something more here. Next thing, Toyota has not been on our list for 4 years either, and the last time they were on was with the Prius. Now, whereas Mercedes is at least giving us a lot of new engines to evaluate, when was the last time we had, you know, an all-new clean sheet engine from Toyota? It's really surprising that, you know, one of the largest automakers in the world is really kind of turning a blind eye to breakthrough engine development. You know, we've got Volkswagen and General Motors and Ford just, you know, throwing engines at the market.
They needed to do it, though. I mean, Toyota's been there for a long time. They've already had fuel-efficient engines in the market. You know, they were ahead.
But they're being lapped. I
Well,
mean,
wait a minute. They're not being lapped in
really.
hybrids. They're
No.
kicking the whole world's butt in hybrids.
Okay,
You know,
that's
so
true.
Yeah.
True.
I think that's a different philosophy, and I think it's also one of the most profitable automakers in the world. And I think they're maximizing profits. They're focusing on making, you know, a lot of mainstream bread and butter cars. And but man, I mean, you know, nobody can touch them in hybrids. So
Yeah.
it's maybe they're just a little bit out of your wheelhouse, Tom.
Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will talk next year at the 2015 Ward's 10 Best Engines as our list comes together. Thank you.